I think if you're going to define California at this very moment, California is defined by crisis.
You just heard the 34th District Assemblyman, Vince Fong. In 2016, Vince Fong was elected to represent the 34th Assembly District, which encompasses most of Kern County. Vince serves as the following Assembly committees: Budget Committee, Vice Chair; Transportation Committee, Vice Chair; Appropriations Committee, and the Business and Professions Committee. Vince began his career with Congressman Bill Thomas, chair of the Ways and Means Committee. Working on international trade policy, he then returned home to serve the residents of Kern County. For nearly a decade, Vince served as the district director of House Leader and Congressman Kevin McCarthy until Vince was elected to the State Assembly in 2016. Vince is a lifelong resident of Kern County. He earned a bachelor degree from UCLA and a master's from Princeton University. He serves on the boards of the Jim Burke Education Foundation and Honor Flight Kern County, which he works to send World War II, Korean War, and Vietnam veterans to Washington, D.C. to see their memorials. In today's show, we discussed AB 2798, the freight development. Later in the show, we talk about AB 522, forest fire prevention pilot project exemption. And be sure to stay tuned to hear the rapid fire answers from Vince Fong.
Welcome back to the Our 2 Cents podcast, the show where your local professionals sit down with an array of guests to hear their story and impart some wisdom for both business and life-improving skills. This is your place to hear business and community leaders discuss relevant topics that matter to you.
And welcome to Our 2 Cents. My name is Troy Burton. I'll be your co-host today with Kyle W. Jones, and we have a pretty cool guest today, a good friend of ours and to our community. But before we get started, we want to encourage all of our listeners to check us out on our social media pages. We have all of them out there. YouTube is our newest one. We really appreciate some feedback there. Instagram, of course, Facebook, and follow us. We want you to participate in what we do and what we have coming. Just last week, we gave away really cool 6 tickets to the fair. And from what I understand, it was a secret, and she brought her little kids in and kind of gave Olivia the hint who she was without saying it because the kids didn't know, and then she took them to the fair. So that was very cool. That was Diana Perez. Congratulations.
Yeah, and in parking pass, don't forget that. I mean, that's prime real estate.
Wow, we even
parking.
threw in parking.
We did. We're stepping up in the world.
That's great. Vince, we're happy to have you here today, but before we get started, I want to just kick around a little bit about kind of what the climate is in Sacramento. Today we have our 34th District Assemblyman Vince Fong here, great friend of the community and Valley. And if you can just kind of set the stage and let us know what kind of political environment we're in today in Sac, and then we're going to talk about a lot more things.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. There's been a lot going on since the last time I was on the program. Certainly, I think if you're going to define California at this very moment, California is defined by crisis. So, you know, if you talk to the average person at your Starbucks or Eureka, they're going to lay out they're frustrated with crime. Cost of living is through the roof. Everything's more expensive. Gas prices is probably the one area that people see it the most in their pocketbook.
And rent, too. Don't forget rent. Rent is a...
housing. I mean, when I talk about cost of living and the affordability crisis, I think it's the cost of all necessities and essentials, right? So rent, groceries, gasoline. I mean, those are the biggies to a lot of folks. You know, if you compare the price of gasoline today, just compared to last week, it's probably up 20, 25 cents.
It is.
With refinery capacity issues, the hurricane that's coming off of Florida and everything disrupting the domestic energy situation. Then you got what's going on in the world with Russia and Ukraine and what's going on in Europe. And then you add in drought, wildfire risk, homelessness, and that's just within 30 seconds. I've listed some heavy, significant issues. Electrical grid. We just got through the flex alerts and whether the lights were going to stay on.
Yep.
Supply chain issues are still real going into Thanksgiving and Christmas. So, that's just, at the very moment. So the public is extremely frustrated. And I think when they look at Sacramento, I think the biggest question is, like, what are you guys doing? Like, what's happening? You've outlined all these crises. We've told you our concerns, and then what are you focusing on? And then you've got bills that, like, where the governor wants the phase out gas cars by 2035. At the same time, like literally the next day after he makes the announcement, he's telling everyone, turn off your appliances. Our grid's not going to sustain the type of energy use that we need because of the heat wave. So there's just this situation where the public is questioning and frustrated with the direction of California. So moving forward, we're going into the month before the election. Ballots are going to go out in the first week of October. And so what does the public do? The public is extremely frustrated. I've never seen an electorate as angry as they are. And so what do they, and this is now their chance to say, hey, look, we are now going to signal and tell everyone this is where we want the state to go. We're frustrated with what's going on. So do they elect new people? Do they make a wholesale change? Who do they elect? What issues are they going to be focusing on? And they're going to exercise that through the ballot box. So that's the kind of the frame right now that we're focused on, going into November and the end of the year. Now our session is over. The governor right now has about 500 bills left that he needs to review before he has a deadline that he has to sign or veto these bills before the end of the month.
500?
500 left over. I mean, there was maybe 700, 800 bills that got sent to the governor's desk.
Okay.
So he's methodically worked through most. He's vetoed some controversial ones. He's signed a lot of controversial ones. The one yesterday when it comes to card check. And what it means to our agricultural industry. That I think if you talk to a farmer or an agricultural producer, they're already faced with significant labor challenges.
Absolutely.
I think that bill is going to do damage to our agricultural industry. In the energy space, significant amounts of bills that the governor has signed that I think will do tremendous damage to our long-term energy production. Our electricity challenges are going to intensify. He did extend the nuclear power plant in San Luis Obispo. In Diablo Canyon. Terrible name for
the devil.
Not good for a nuclear plant.
Not a good name for a nuclear power plant. But the interesting thing, and we can talk about this as well, is the governor completely did a 180. He flipped on his outlook on nuclear power. 2 years ago, he wanted to phase it out. Sure. Now he needs it. Right. Now he wants it.
So I just want to chime in on that because I've heard this, and I don't know if it's actually factually correct or not. But what I'm understanding is there was a lot of federal subsidies that were coming in to support older nuclear plants, and he wanted that money. That is the explanation for the 180 flip. That's what I've heard. Do you know if that's true or false, or is that?
So it's a combination of both.
Okay.
Now my roommate in the legislature represents San Luis Obispo, Jordan Cunningham, and so he was the point person in the extension of Diablo. I think that the federal assistance that came in to preserve nuclear power was clearly a catalyst in the conversation of, was it possible? Was it feasible to extend the nuclear power plant for 5 years? The governor actually wanted a 10-year extension, a 5-year extension with a 10-year option. When you look at our electricity grid, any given moment, and of course, after the sun sets and the wind stops blowing, after about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, our electricity grid significantly converts in terms of where we get our electricity. But in the evening, at any given time, over 50% of our electricity production comes from natural gas. Right now, I think you probably have about, we can look it up, but on the Cal ISO website, but maybe 20, 25, maybe 30% of our electricity is renewable. Then you've got significant imports that come into the state. When we say imports, that's also natural gas and coal. Right? We're importing that into California from other states, from the Midwest. About 6 to 10% of that production in California at this very moment is nuclear, and that's Diablo Canyon. And so the governor looks at the portfolio and says, okay, at this very moment, if Diablo Canyon doesn't exist, 10% of electricity at this very moment goes away. And there's nothing that replaces it at this very moment. Battery storage is not mature enough yet. Everything else that would make up something that would be consistent over time, 24 hours a day. And so that's why the governor makes a complete 180. Because the nightmare scenario, if you talk to anyone in the energy world, is a heat wave that hits the Western United States. Right, because we need electricity. We're using our air conditioning. We're running our appliances. We're doing everything else, and so is every other state in the West.
Yep.
And so all the imports that we would get from other states, they're not providing it,
Right.
Because they're using it themselves.
Right.
And so that was why, and that highlighted the vulnerability of our grid at that very moment.
But isn't this something that, I mean, has been known for a while? He had to have known that Canyon produces anywhere from 6 to 10% of our electricity, and there's no way to replace it. So, I mean, is it just political hyperboles?
This is what we've been telling the Newsom administration for years. So at least the 6 years I've been elected, and even folks before that, is like you have to have reliable and stable and dependable energy. That's a fundamental responsibility of government and utilities. And so when you force utilities to buy more expensive electricity, right, then of course that cost gets passed on to users, to homeowners and renters and consumers,
business owners,
and business owners, and so their costs are rising. So if you were going to define the biggest frustration for Californians is that they're paying more and getting less on pretty much everything, but on water, on electricity, and everything else, right? That's the case. So juxtapose that whole debate, and then now the governor's like, okay, well, I want to basically phase out all oil and natural gas production in California.
Fossil fuel right.
Production, even though his own studies, his own agencies say that what he's advocating for is not only extremely costly, it's unfeasible. Right. So it's not realistic. We are going to be using petroleum and natural gas way beyond 2040.
Forever.
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, now...
technology can change. I mean, there could be,
technology would change.
Yeah.
I mean, look, this is where I always tell, when I have a discussion about energy, is that everyone creates a false choice, right? You can have a balanced view. You can be pragmatic and say, look, we are going to need petroleum, natural gas, and do we want more renewables? Absolutely. Now the problem I think that we have with the Newsom administration's approach is that he picks winners and losers, right? He has a preference on the type of renewables that he wants, where I would be more agnostic and say, well, if it's hydrogen, if it's geothermal, if it's nuclear,
right.
if it's solar and wind, like let's do it all. Like that would be, especially if we grow as an economy and if we want the state of California to grow, we got to power it. But to somehow say, okay, we're going to eliminate petroleum in California, well, that's not only unrealistic, that's irresponsible, right? Because right now, if you were trying to do that, we still are going to use petroleum. To power California, the cars, the planes, everything around us, right? We consume millions of gallons of oil.
Barrels of oil, yeah.
And we only produce about 300,000 barrels a day in California.
Correct.
So where does that difference come from? That difference comes from foreign countries.
Right.
We import it.
Right.
And that dependency, you look at any analysis, right? The reliance on foreign oil in California specifically has grown over time. And it's because of the policies imposed by the Newsom administration. If you don't make it up from somewhere, we're gonna get it from Ecuador, we're getting it from Saudi Arabia,
Sure.
We're getting it from Iraq, and so that's only going to grow. My argument is, at this very moment, when you have instability in Russia and Ukraine, when their energy consumption is changing, when we have volatility in the energy market, why would we expose California to that volatility? We should be increasing production right now in California so that we would minimize the impact to the average person, so that we would increase our supply of oil and natural gas.
That's assuming they're considering the average person's feelings in this argument, right? I mean, I see where your argument is coming from, but you're presuming that the little people's interests are on the forefront of our politicians and our government.
Well, it has to be.
But realistically, is it? I mean, how frustrated are people with government and state, federal level, whatever? It's like they don't have the average person's best interest at heart. So I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. I'm saying what you're saying makes perfect sense, but I think you're making a big assumption that our governor actually wants to make things easier for the average Californian. He has his own agenda, and so
I'm not going to disagree that the governor has his own agenda, but at the end of the day, we are elected to represent the people of California. And when 1.4 million barrels of oil is consumed every single day, and we only produce 300,000, and that's going down,
right?
And then that difference comes from countries that don't like us, right? We have to do something. And then when natural gas power is the majority of our power production in California, and we have to keep the lights on. And all the while, he wants to set these unrealistic goals that sound good on paper, but just are not realistic. Then at some point, something's going to give. And that's what we're seeing. Like the consequences that of all these poor decisions are real. Like they're not thought exercises anymore. When we have flex alerts and people are unplugging their appliances and people aren't charging their vehicles, when gas prices are at $6.99 outside of Gorman, or $5.99 on Saukto Highway, that's a real impact to people.
I 100% agree with you. It's just, I just know what a lot of people think, and myself included. I don't know if I don't let Troy into this too, but you commented earlier that now's the time we're going to have to go to the ballot and exercise a vote to kind of force what direction we want. But is there any chance that Newsom's going to lose this election? Is there any chance that probably 8 out of 10 races are just not competitive because of the way our system is structured and gerrymandering is done in our state? So I'm asking you, is like, are we?
Is it going to happen overnight? No. Will California change for the better? Will there be more balance in this state? Yes. Now, that is dependent on a lot of factors. That's dependent on us finding the candidates. That's assuming people will step up and run, that people will re-engage into the process. Yes, absolutely. I mean, people don't give away power, right? When they're in power. It has to be earned. And I think that's what we're seeing. We see that on the national level, too. I mean, historically, in my short political lifetime, we're going to see Congress flip again.
Sure.
So it flipped in the early 2000s. It flipped again 8 years after that, and then it's going to flip again probably this November. The presidencies have flipped from party to party. So we have a very dynamic political environment, in part because there isn't a whole lot of stability, and people aren't feeling that things are going in the right direction. And so will there be some political stability over time? Don't know. It depends on whether the elected officials that are being elected can find a way to come together to really, really tackle the issues that people care about. I think that's the critical point. If you listed your top 5 priorities or your top 20, and you listed your top 20, and I listed my top 20, right? You would think that maybe 10 through 20 won't be the same, but hopefully 1 through 10 will be the same.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so let's set aside 11 through 20, and let's just focus on 1 through 10.
Mm-hmm. And you could probably do that no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, right? You can ask anyone what are your focus points, or what are the things that our government needs to address on both sides, and you probably get the same answer.
Exactly.
So yeah, I agree with you completely.
And so this is, as I'm trying to shake up the bubble in Sacramento and create an external force that will change the dynamics to get people to focus on the top 10. The biggest message and the biggest way to do that is that new people have to be elected. And if new people are elected, everyone's going to be, wait a minute, like the public is throwing people out and putting new people in, and they're changing the players on, and now we got to go, we got to focus. And so after November, we got to govern. I mean, whoever wins, we have real crises and real challenges that we're going to have to focus on. And so after November, that's go again, and we focus on what bills we can draft, what we're going to do with the budget. You guys are watching the economy just as much as I am. If you look at the last 2 months in California, the revenue coming into California has been billions under projection. So the economy is beginning to contract, to slow. Right. And that's just in California.
Right.
That doesn't mean, look what's going on across the country. The Fed is acting. What's going to happen in Europe? Will there be a worldwide recession that will create even more economic distress? Possible, right? And so that creates its own ripple effects that we are going to have to deal with as a state.
So, Troy, you got some bills that you wrote down that you want to talk about. This nice little segue. Pick a couple. Let's see what you have to say.
Let's talk about 2798.
Okay.
It's freight development. What exactly is that?
So supply chain is one of the crises that we've been grappling with probably in the middle of the pandemic and then moving forward till today. And we're still dealing with it. Consumer behavior changed, right? Everyone was buying things online. We are moving more containers through our ports in California than ever before. So they're moving at a pretty good clip, but of course it's you've got workforce shortages, you've got warehouse issues, you've got everything, trucking, rail. And so the supply chain crisis has been so large. The first question I always get is like, well, what are you going to do? How are you
What can you do
to start solving this problem? You got chassis challenges and everything else. And so when I first got elected to the state assembly, I was asked to serve as the only Republican on the Select Committee on Ports and Goods Movement, which is a very sleepy committee until 2 years ago. Right. And then now it's the committee that everyone is kind of focused on to try to grapple with goods movement, which, you know, a lot of people didn't focus on how their stuff got to their house.
As long as it got there.
As long as it got there.
Right.
You know, and so what the bill does is as I talked to the ports, they said, look, the problem we have with the congestion at the ports in part is driven by the fact that we have no space to put these containers. So we have ships sitting off the coast of California full of stuff, but we can't unload that stuff because we don't have enough space. We don't have land because empty containers and chassis are sitting, well, actually they're not chassis, empty containers are sitting on the ports, and some of them are sitting on chassis that need to be used. So we need to do freight development, transportation improvements so that we can work with our partners and commercial developers around the ports and around the warehouses to get those projects off the ground, streamlined as fast as possible so that we can store equipment, we can put these containers there. Because right now, if we don't do that, where are they stacking the containers? They were stacking them in neighborhoods.
I've seen them in neighborhoods, yes.
Like in Long Beach and in LA. They stacked 6 high. Right. You know, it was crazy. So
convert those into mini houses, and then we got the homeless situation fixed. And look at this.
Yeah, it's true.
So what the bill does is says, look, you know, we gotta work with local government. We gotta approve these projects, set a timeline. As it goes through the project, developers can continue to make the improvements and get these projects ready to go. So hopefully we can get these projects fast tracked and then move these containers, these empty containers off, store them there. Move the empty containers back to where they need to go in Asia or Europe or wherever they came from, and then begin to get that immediate choke point eased. Now, that's the first step. And then moving forward, you got to align the warehouse hours with the port hours. Port of Long Beach wants to go 24/7. Conceptually, I think that's a great idea, right? You want to move containers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. Other ports around the world do that. The problem that we have in California is that I'm a truck driver. I go to Port of Long Beach. There's some inefficiency problems, so you gotta fix that on the data side. But if I pick up a container at like 8 p.m., 9 p.m., and I drive it to San Bernardino, and that warehouse is closed, right? Then that's not good. That's not a good situation. Yeah. That's what's the point? So you have to align the warehouse hours with the port hours. Now we got a workforce problem, right? So right now in California, there's 65,000 empty, unfilled warehouse jobs.
Gee, Merry Christmas.
And that's right now, before aligning. So if a warehouse wants to go 24/7, they got to find people to work. So you have to align the hours and you have to find people to work. Add in the trucking challenges. We have a truck worker shortage.
Sure.
We need more truckers. So we have to get people into that space as well. So there's the other aspect of it. We need chassis. The majority of our chassis historically have been made in China. If we've learned anything in the pandemic, we've got to harden our supply chain. We actually have to start producing certain items in the United States and California, chassis being one of them. So if we did those things, and if we expanded rail, that needs to be done. We need inland ports. So if you've watched what Kern County has done, Kern County has now approved and is looking to fast track an inland port in Mojave. And if that were to get off the ground, that would begin to ease some of that congestion, coupled with the freight transportation development projects I would do. Now you can begin to position containers, chassis, different equipment throughout the state so that you don't have to send a trucker all the way down to the Port of LA or the Port of Long Beach or to Stockton or to Oakland. They can go pick up their stuff in Mojave or outside of Fresno or anywhere else. It's just kind of like what Amazon does, right? You got to put distribution centers, you got to stage it. But fixing the supply chain is not a sexy topic.
But it's needed.
It's needed. It's the spine of how we get stuff to where it needs to go. 40% of the goods and products that come into the United States, not just California, into the United States, comes through 2 ports, LA and Long Beach. Right. So if there is a congestion problem and a supply chain crisis in those 2 ports alone, you have damaged and has weighed down the entire supply chain of the entire United States. Over $400 billion worth of stuff is coming through those ports. And that's California. The other thing, too, I will add is that we also have to understand that California competes with other states. And so when we had our problems, what was happening? Texas, Florida, Washington State, their ports are saying, wait a minute, If you can't get your stuff,
We'll pick up the slack.
we'll pick up the slack.
Right.
And when we lose market share in California, we don't get that back.
Right.
The other side of it too, and we focus a lot on the import side, right? But the export side is important too. And we talk about our farmers and agriculture. Like we export our stuff to international markets. And so there has to be, so when you talk about supply chain, yes, it's the average consumer. It's our stores, it's our grocery stores, our shopping centers. But it is our farmers and it is our manufacturers. When we put parts together, we build stuff, right? Those parts come from somewhere. And unless we can build them here in the United States, they're going to come from overseas. And that's what we're going to have to deal with. I did have this question, or I had this conversation with someone at Eureka.
Okay.
And in December of 2021. And there was whole talk like, is Christmas going to get canceled? What's going to happen? Supply chain. And it was a really real situation. He tells me, he's like, I went online and I bought everything I could for the next 6 months. And I said, you do know what you did. You made the supply chain crisis worse.
Right.
And he looked at me and he's like, well, what do you mean? I go, where did your stuff come from?
Right.
Where is your stuff coming from? It's coming from overseas. I mean, you ordered it from somewhere. And so when the congestion problem was beginning to intensify, all the retailers, they needed to stock their shelves. So if you're Target, if you're Home Depot, if you pick your retailer, right? Well, they're now sending their own boats to pick up their own stuff. And so those boats are now coming in and adding to the boats currently on waiting.
Right.
And then you have all these other orders coming in and then they're coming. And so that's how you got this, overwhelming situation.
But you really can't blame them for doing that in a way, because they've got to keep their business running, right? They need to remain profitable for their shareholders and so forth. So it's one of those issues where I don't think, it was a pandemic that prompted all this. So, I don't think you really can blame government there for saying, you weren't proactive enough to make sure this doesn't happen. I think it did. I think I'm willing to give government a pass on that
the pandemic accelerated what was inefficiencies were already there.
Right.
Yeah.
Or it brought them to light.
But now that the inefficiencies are there,
let's fix them.
Then let's fix them.
So going back to AB 2798, you explained it very well, except I missed the gist of it. Maybe I haven't gotten there yet, or maybe I just missed it. So is it a money?
So it allows it allows two things. It allows these development projects to move forward as it goes through the local planning process. And then it creates a specific planning process, an approval process with local governments to say, do 5 hearings, get public comment, and then after 5 hearings, give an approval or a denial.
Okay. So it's
a streamlined process.
Okay. So it takes a state out of, so normally it would have to go through local and into the state?
Normally there's a very extensive process that takes place. These are for emergency short-term freight projects to say, look, if a developer has space available, that will give them a fast-track process for an emergency to give the ports some relief. And then, a lot of times when you're waiting for a city to approve your project, you can't do anything. You can't begin to prepare the land. You can't do everything else. So it's a conditional use permit to say, look, okay, as you go through the local planning process, which is important, you can now begin to do all the things in preparation for it to be approved. And when it's approved, everything's done and we can go.
Okay. So this takes away some of the red tape, I guess, if you will.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. And was this bipartisan support?
Passed unanimously through the legislature, signed by the governor, supported by the California Port Authority's Pacific Merchant, the Pacific Merchant Shipping Association. It was a no-brainer. The interesting thing is, a lot of times I always sit there and say, well, why didn't you just do this? you don't even need a law to do this.
Right.
But it's one of those things where the way that the regulations were drafted, you had to we had to outline everything in very specific terms.
Well, that's a positive example of how government can work for the people, right? There's a problem, and you went directly to the source of the problem and said, hey, what can we do to fix this? And they said, how about this? And then
absolutely
worked its way up.
I literally drove around the Port of Long Beach and Port of LA, went to Stockton, went to Oakland, met with the port authorities. And I said, look, what's the immediate solution? And the immediate solution is we need space. We need space, and we have all these projects that are right now kind of trapped in red tape. If we could just find a way to streamline the process to get these projects off the ground, we can begin to move these empty containers off so that we can free up space. I'm like, well, done. Let's just do it.
And so now is that
that's signed the law and now goes into effect January 1st of 2023.
Okay. So we haven't started the fix yet.
Haven't started yet, but there are projects right now ready to go. At the moment we get to the new year, we can get those projects done.
Now is that a budgetary? It's probably a government.
Doesn't require any additional money.
Okay.
Vince, what are they doing long term when it comes to our ports? And here's where I'm going with this. So, I heard a lot what you said, but one of the big things you said is they need space. So we create space. We have a huge trucking issue, and if I'm not mistaken, the trucking industry is going to have to be electric at some point in time too. And I don't know if that's a California or national thing, but I mean, there's a shortage right now. I mean, if you follow a truck around right now, everybody's got a sign on the back that says team driver $180,000 a year, which is pretty cool. And I work in the trucking industry in the insurance sector. The average trucker is above 50 years old. Yeah. No young people are coming into that. I mean, my whole point is we have to look. If we had all the resources to make it better today, it's not a long-term fix. So I hope that they look long-term because there's a lot more scenarios than just space or just trucking.
So the one bill that did not get passed, that got held, I would say that a significant amount of the bills that I carried this year were focused on the supply chain, just because of my role on the Ports Committee and the Goods Movement Committee and being the vice chair of the Transportation Committee. The one bill that I had that I was trying to get through was to create kind of a high-level advisor to protect the supply chain. So a lot of times we focus on like, okay, what do we need to do long-term on supply chain? What do we need to do to protect it, harden it, improve it? And a lot of times it's just stopping stuff. A lot of times everyone has these nice bills and they don't think it affects the supply chain. And then no one's like looking at it like, well, this bill that deals with the trucking industry, like, no one's saying like, well, maybe we don't need this bill right away because it's going to impact the supply chain. So to create kind of a supply chain freight advisor or advisory position. So the way I see this particular, what your question is and how do we fix the supply chain long term is to kind of look at it like in terms of like buckets. What do we have to do at the ports specifically? So you, of course, have labor issues at the ports.
Didn't we just have a longshoreman strike?
Yeah, the contracts are being renegotiated. Well, at least in the Port of Long Beach in LA, they're in negotiation right now. And then you have other ports going through that too. So how do we do need to expand the rail capacity at these ports. So we have rail projects right now before the Port of Long Beach and LA that would add maybe 2 to 6 new rail lines coming out of the ports. And each rail line could probably move about 300 to 500 containers, right? Just imagine. So then think about that. Every container is a truck. So if you could put more containers on rail, you've eased some of the traffic congestion to come in the ports because you're just moving more containers via rail instead of truck. So adding more rail capacity would be important. We probably do need to improve like the data systems within port as well. So we track, FedEx tracks every package. You'd think that we could track every container too coming into the port and leaving the port as well. So that way we can make the trucking industry more efficient. So like I don't want a truck driver waiting 4 hours in line trying to pick up a container. So if I can cut that wait time to like 30 minutes to 40 minutes, say, okay, show up at this time at this terminal, you'll pick up this container and you can go, right? It's beneficial for the trucker, more volume, more trips. He or she can make more money. You're more efficient. You're moving more containers. Everything's a win-win. So we do have to invest in upgrading just the IT hardware side of that too. And then you got to align the hours. And then on the trucking side, yes, we have a truck driver shortage. You look at AB5, which got a lot of attention when it came to like artists and journalists and whether you can be an independent contractor. Uber drivers, Uber and Lyft for sure, right? 2/3 of our truckers that are operating out of the ports are independent owner truck drivers. So if you're looking at AB5 as like what its impact is to Uber and Lyft and the gig economy, significant, right? If you look at AB5 in terms of its impact to the supply chain, disastrous. Imagine if 2/3 of the truck drivers now taking containers out of our ports are no longer on the road. I mean, how do the supply chain can't sustain itself. No. And then you have a truck driver shortage moving forward. So I want to say in 2 to 3 years, we're going to need probably to double the amount of truck drivers that we currently have just to make things work. So we have to do that. And we have to make sure that we have trucks. Right? I mean, you can't be a truck driver without a truck, right? So
it seems like a structural and infrastructure problem Like I'm going back to me. Everything seems like it's infrastructure. And
it's infrastructure, but it's also. So this is the crux of the problem, right? So AB 5 says, okay, you can't be an independent truck driver, and so you got to either be employed by a company, or now you got to get licensed, or you got to do all these hoops to get right with the state government. So that's another $15,000-$20,000. So you're probably on the margin trying to survive right now as a truck driver, as an independent truck driver now. And oh, by the way, in 5 to 10 years, CARB's going to come in and say that truck that you're driving is not compliant.
Right.
So now you got to spend another $120,000 to buy a new truck. So that truck driver who's already on the edge of trying to just make ends meet is now looking at, in 5 to 10 years, like $140,000 more of costs. Mm-hmm. That truck driver's like, maybe I don't want to stay in California. Maybe I go to Nevada.
Right.
Maybe I go to Colorado. Maybe I go to Texas, and I'll be a truck driver there.
Yep.
And so that's the transportation side of the supply chain. Then you remember reading in the Wall Street Journal, and the president and Congress and had to weigh in. We almost had a strike affecting the rail industry.
Rail strike. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Right. So that was avoided by the skin of our teeth. But so we got rail issues too, and then at the same time, you just got you have global issues as well. But if we could produce more in the United States, that's certainly a plus. But at the same time, look, as you said before, right, the pandemic has changed our consumption. We are not, we're buying stuff on Amazon.
Right.
The Pandora's box has been open, right? So that stuff is coming. Someone had told me that something like 75 to 80% of our footwear is made in Asia.
Doesn't surprise me.
Right? So just buying shoes,
right,
like has to be delivered through the supply chain,
right,
from Asia to LA, taken by container, by truck or rail to DSW, or it's in the mall, or directly to our home. They just think that that's how the supply chain functions.
Right.
So it's a chain.
Yeah.
So a lot of people thought, oh, once you just fix the ports, we're good. Well, no, we're not good.
No.
Because we have all these other structural issues that we're having to deal with the supply chain.
And even if we expand the rail, construction is going to take time.
Well, you got short line rail.
I don't want to bring up the high-speed rail. But
we talked about the last time we were here.
I know, but you get my point. I mean, construction takes time. And who knows?
It doesn't have to take time, though, right?
But here's the interesting thing. I mean, look, I am clearly one of the biggest critics of the high-speed rail authority in California.
Thank you.
But just imagine you dump the high-speed rail in California, and you just say, okay, well, we're going to move cargo.
Repurpose
for cargo.
Yeah.
Move more containers back and forth. If we had inland ports in Fresno, Mojave, San Bernardino, and Riverside, and Stockton, and we had rail that connected all of those four, and that would take trucks off the road, and then we were able to deal with the trucking shortage, and we were able to allow the ports to expand. That would be, we put California in a way better path. And the electricity crisis and the energy grid, right, that affects the ports too. So when the governor when we were in the middle of the flex alert, and I don't think a lot of people knew this, he signed an executive order touting that we had more electricity capacity to put more electricity back in the grid. You know what he did? He told all the boats in the ports to unplug.
Get off the grid.
So all those container ships, right, that are plugged in the port, they're now unplugging off the coast of California. All that electricity is now going back in the grid. He basically let them do that.
And they convert back over to diesel?
And they're burning diesel now off the coast of California.
Right.
Right? And so, again, affects the supply chain.
Right.
So everything is all interconnected when we talk about, like, how do ports power themselves? Now, if we force the ports to go electric, well, that's massive cost increases to the ports. How do they stay in business?
What I was getting at earlier is you mentioned, Troy, you said construction takes time, and it does, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And maybe this is something that you can opine on, but the legislator can do something to ease the red tape of that, right? Like, we're going to waive the environmental impact report on this project, or we're going to, like, similar.
You could waive CEQA. You could streamline CEQA, all the environmental review,
because that's really what's holding up most construction, right? I mean, that's
absolutely
okay.
You talk to any developer, any builder, anything. And that's the thing.
The permitting process.
The permitting process. But that's, like, if we talk about frustration in Sacramento, that is the biggest frustration, right? The governor and whatever the legislature, depending on what their interest is, they'll waive those rules for things they care about. But on the big things that we care about, on supply chain, on water storage, on on wildfire prevention.
Check
they
the
won't
box.
they won't waive CEQA for that.
Right.
So when Berkeley got sued and lost and they couldn't, they were going to deny students coming to Berkeley because they didn't have housing for them. The governor waived CEQA
Build those
for
houses.
student housing in Berkeley.
Right.
Because he didn't want a bunch of students that got accepted that were now getting rejection letters. Like, well, that's not right.
Right.
Wow. So he did it with that. He did that for football stadiums. He did that in LA. He waived CEQA for football stadiums and baseball stadiums.
Yeah, SoFi got built pretty quick.
SoFi got built.
Sure did.
I think they waived CEQA for the baseball stadium in Oakland. So this is the inconsistency.
Right.
I think that the state needs water storage and wildfire prevention and everything else.
So let's talk real quick about the forest fire prevention pilot project exemption, AB 522. Forest fires obviously is a hot topic for California. So
no pun intended, right?
yeah, none.
We have to get as many dead and dying trees out of our forests as quickly as possible. That's the.
How dare you say that?
That's what we need to do. Prescribe burning, and we need to get rid of the fuels. So there is an existing pilot project was going to expire. Our goal in California, set by the governor, is that we need to manage and clear about 500,000 acres a year. And I say clear, I mean I'm not saying we're just taking out the dead stuff.
Sure.
So-
Every other tree.
That's right. That's the goal. And so the most significant part of that 500,000 is actually from private landowners. And so that pilot project, which I think created actually it doesn't, I don't think, it probably was the most streamlined process that we had to say that if you are a private landowner and you can prove that removing these brush and trees would reduce the severity of fire and was approved by a forester, that you could get a timber harvest plan immediately and clear that land. And so we said that's a project that needs to be extended. And so we added 2 years to the project to create certainty. Because right now, if it was gonna expire in a year, if you're a private landowner and say, well, I would like to participate in this program, but why would I go through the effort of doing all the science and collecting all the data and everything else in a year and 6 months, the project's gonna expire. Like, I'm not gonna participate. So we extended it out for 2 years, created that certainty. Again, not a sexy topic, but one of the few programs that landowners were using that was actually going to reduce the chances of wildfires. And so we were able to get that through the legislature too.
That's a major impact.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, can you imagine California without being bombarded by wildfires every year, or what that would do to our economy and resources?
And we weren't going to meet the $500,000 acre goal without private landowners being part of the solution.
And is that underway?
Signed the law goes. So the program is already in effect. It gets a 2-year extension, and so
it didn't need an urgency clause.
They need an urgency clause.
I'm learning, Troy. See,
I noticed
being
that.
educated. I got. I know you're running short on time, but I want to talk real quick about 26 and 27. I
Sure.
don't know what your position is on those, but I like to gamble and I'd like to build it up for my cell phone. So what do you think?
Prop 26 and 27. I'm sure your listeners are probably either tired or haven't, or if they have not seen the ads on Prop 26, 27, I have no idea where they've been. So for those who are not familiar with the numbers, so Prop 26 allows for online gaming. Prop 27 allows for online gaming. That's right. 26 is the tribal initiative. So that's the right now the fight, right? Is that revenue going to tribes, and I'm a supporter of tribal sovereignty and wanting to ensure that we do right to those on native lands. They, of course, are concerned about what's going to happen if everyone can gamble online. So 26 is supported by the major tribal sovereignty reservations in California. 27 allows for online gaming, and so but of course they're using the homelessness issue, saying, "Well, we're going to raise all this money,
right,
and then we're going to go to homelessness." Right now, if I had to bet, and so no pun intended on that one, I think
bet every day of our lives.
I think
times a day.
I think both of those initiatives fail.
Oh, interesting.
Right now, I think the latest survey by PPIC, the Public Policy Institute of California, has both of them at like 27%.
Really?
So
I thought 27 was had huge support. Maybe it's just my degenerate friends that
maybe that's your
inner circle.
So I think what's going to happen, I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I would say that both fail, and that it comes to the legislature, and the legislature is going to have to figure out,
sort it out,
how to allow some form of online gaming that is allowed now by the Supreme Court, and then also balance the tribal interests to figure out how do they maintain their ability to support their tribal institutions and the tribal government and all the things that go with it.
And this proposition is not like one of those dual ones where like if one passes, the other one doesn't.
Only 160. Yeah, I mean, only one. Yeah, only one can go into effect.
Right. Okay.
Now, the interesting thing is the fast forward to 2024. If both fail, there is now waiting in the wings a third initiative, and that third initiative is to allow online gaming on tribal casinos and on the phones.
Okay, so that's one.
So it's a hybrid of, it's not really a hybrid, but it's actually the third lane.
Right.
I guess if there are 3 lanes, there's the people want to wager and gamble on tribal casinos. The second lane is on through phone, and the third lane is a little bit of both.
Okay, sounds like a middle of the road approach.
But that's 2024.
Yeah. And I think because 27 came on first, right? And then I think 26 was a response to 27?
No, 26 was first.
Okay.
26 was first, but it got signatures in the middle of the pandemic, and then it was put on the 2022 ballot.
Oh, okay.
And then
okay.
FanDuel and DraftKings,
Yep.
they qualified 27, and then that got onto the ballot as well. So
Right.
now you have 26, 27 that are on the ballot together. I'm trying to read both initiatives. I think that right now, a lot of people are just confused of like, where does the money go?
Right. I think
what is being done.
Yeah.
I mean, you got to look at the details, and I think that is what is causing a lot of people to be undecided, and I'm probably one of them. And at the same time, trying to figure out, okay, as someone who supports the tribes, how do I ensure that they have the ability to support themselves? And then at the same time, for those who want to get the game online, I mean, how do you do it in a way that has real safeguards?
Right.
Like, it's one thing to say like, okay, everyone can do online. Now, I want to say there's 11 states, maybe 11 to 14 states that have either allowed online gaming or are looking to put online gaming to legalize it in accordance to what the Supreme Court has allowed. I don't think online gaming is going away.
Right.
I just think that it's going to be, how is it going to look in California in comparison to other states?
Yeah, that's fair. And I think most people's knee-jerk responses, if they don't understand a proposition or if they kind of have questions about it, it's just a no.
Yeah.
And then it gets...
Well, it's also generational, and it's also based on kind of like whether you're, a lot of parents have concerns like, well, do I want my kid to,
right.
to access, gambling sites online, which, of course you got to put the safeguards in place. And I think that everyone, whether you're on the tribal side or on the online gaming side, the casino side, you'd want those safeguards to be in place. But then if, do I want to be able to bet on the Dodgers at some point? Like maybe if I had the ability to do that, maybe I would do that, but
you got bigger things to worry about.
I'll just call you and ask.
Hey,
what's
I'm not a bookie. You can't do that. No, call me to make a bet.
No, I meant ask for your opinion on who's going to win.
I'm joking.
Assemblyman, we have a little special episode here, what we call rapid fire questions. So we're going to put you on the hot seat, if you will.
All right.
What is a quote you live by?
So I got this quote. It's actually from Kevin McCarthy's dad, who told it to him, who told it to me, which is, any job, big or small, do it right or not at all. And I've tried to live by that.
Can't argue with that one.
I like it.
Yes. If you could turn back the time and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you tell him?
I would say if my 18-year-old self was sitting in front of me, I would tell him to be content and stay humble. Those are the two things I think, two characteristics that I think are missing in this world.
I like the content one. That's tough for a lot of people who have drive and type A personalities. It's it's hard to be content, but I think that's a good
well, you can be content and be driven too at the same time.
Yeah, but then are you content?
Then are you content? Exclusive.
Yeah, then are you content anymore if you're Are you driven if you're content? No.
What is the best advice you've ever received?
I would say that there's two pieces of advice that I was given when I started my career in politics, and I think it's been true in probably politics and outside of politics, which is decisions are made with or without you. And so you've got to be in the room when those decisions are made. And when you're in the room, you want to be the first one in the room and the last one to leave.
That's a good one. That's wisdom right there, folks.
I like that. Once again, Vince Fong, thank you so much. 34th District Assembly. Appreciate your service, buddy.
Thanks for having me.
This show has been brought to you by the Law Office of Kyle Jones, Troy Burton with the Lynn Company, CPA John Duffield, Scott Hansen Real Estate Lender, broker and investor, Dave Plivlich, President and CEO of the Marcom Group and MarcomBranding.com, and Amanda DiGiacomo, President of Atlas Financial Solutions. You've been listening to the Our 2 Cents podcast. Check out the show notes for links and more information about the show. Also visit our website at our2centspodcast.com or catch us on Instagram at Our 2 Cents Podcasts. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and share with others.